Welcome to the Artistic Foodies, the show that explores life through the lens of art and food. I'm Abbas Muhammad,
And I'm Irfan Raidan.
and today we're bringing you a bonus episode that we hope will benefit your personal and spiritual journey during Ramadan. We concluded season 2 and the discussion about Muslims in the media with our season finale, an interview with Asad Ali Jafri. We hope you join us for season 3 as we start to shift gears now from the art world and reorient a little bit towards the food world as we discuss the food industry from various angles, from halal certifications to entrepreneurship, food apps, foodies on social media, and so much more. I'm excited for season 3, and I hope you're hungry for some more delicious episodes. For today's interview, Irfan Raidan interviews Mounir as we get ready for Ramadan 2023. Mounir is the world's leading fitness expert inside of the Muslim health and fitness niche, who specializes in helping busy professional Muslims master time management and a healthy lifestyle, peak performance and focus, as well as metabolism and energy, so that they can show up as better Muslims, do more good deeds, and be better role models for their families, as well as, of course, perform better at work and in business. Mounir joins us today to discuss his Ramadan prep series on the best Suhoor and Iftaar foods, as well as Islamic motivation from the Sunnah of our Prophet, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to be fit, healthy, and disciplined. So without any further ado, let's get into the interview.
All right, so my name is Mounir Lazzouni. Jazakallah khair for having me here. Assalamu alaikum to all the viewers. And I'm from San Diego, California, and my ancestry is Pakistani and Algerian. And I got into fitness coaching. I got into fitness actually, 13 years ago. And it was kind of like, my first hobby that I truly felt proud of and that I got really, really deep into. That was actually productive for my life, aka not video games, right? Because I used to be totally addicted to video games when I was a kid. And so it really became a means by which I was able to become a lot more productive, a lot more disciplined, and it gave me so much enrichment in many areas of my life. And so when I went to college, I did actually want to be a strength coach at one point. Then I wanted to be a psychotherapist. Then I realized, it's okay, I'll just be a personal trainer. And I realized there's a lot of money in the field, but alhamdulillah, it's been a great source of risk. And so there's been ups and downs, but of course, it's been a very lucrative field and I've gotten to do what I love. So alhamdulillah, I'm doing it professionally for 7 years now, alhamdulillah. And yeah, I'm just really grateful for the journey, grateful for the opportunity, and grateful for the opportunity to be here and share some value with your audience as well, inshallah.
Thanks again for joining us today. And, I myself have recently started getting back into fitness after like a very long time because, after been married and have 2 young kids and then, work and then my health actually had some issues like, typical Desi person. We have high blood sugar, high cholesterol. So my doctor pretty much said, "Hey, you have to start doing some exercise now." So now I have no choice. But I'm trying to do 3 times a week. At least 1 hour, 3 times a week. So and obviously, so I've been doing for about 6 months now. So I lost about 20 pounds so far. So that's pretty good. Alhamdulillah. I still have a long ways to go, of course. So I'm very excited to, talk to you and, a fitness expert because as you know, there's all kinds of stuff on the internet, TikTok, social media, Instagram, where a lot of different people, tell you what you should eat, what you shouldn't eat, about what's good workout tips and all this. So it's good to talk to someone who's a Muslim, and who is has experience in Ramadan. So some of the questions that we have is how do we maintain our health, exercise while we are, fasting in Ramadan? So what are some quick tips that you suggest for our listeners?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that every person needs is you need a strategy that's going to work for you with your schedule. So obviously, as professionals who work, who have families, and then obviously we have not only the regular ibadah and Islamic duties that we have outside of Ramadan, but in addition to that, inside of Ramadan, we have suhoor, iftar, tarawih. So there's a lot of different time constraints to account for beyond what we would typically experience as, busy professional Muslims and, fathers and mothers outside of Ramadan. So it's really important that you make a list of everything that you need to achieve in any given day and actually time block these things into your schedule. See, the biggest thing that is really important, as you mentioned before, part of what led to the health concerns that you had that eventually led to you now having to work out is the fact that you got really busy with work and family and everything else. And, sometimes it does have to come down to that, like that wake up call to give you that sense of urgency to take action. But at the same time, what is the strategy to be able to juggle all those priorities so that doesn't happen in the first place, or so we can fix it if it does happen, or if we're on the path to it happening? We need to become a master of time management, and being able to time block things into your day is the key strategy for this, right? And so, we might need to sacrifice a little bit of our free flowingness to be able to create that schedule for ourselves. And the interesting thing is, once you've stuck to a schedule for long enough, you then start to be able to just operate on that rhythm without the need for so much structure, kind of like with somebody who's getting on a nutrition plan, being able to track their food first. And then once you develop a gut feel for it, you don't necessarily have to track anymore because you have more of an intuition. So when it comes to Ramadan, we have 4 weeks basically of Ramadan, 30 days. And in order to quickly get into that rhythm, it's really important that before Ramadan, we kind of create a preliminary plan and that we know how to adjust that plan based on what comes up. So let's look at kind of the different things, right? We got to look at, okay, how do we prep the foods for suhoor so we're not just scrambling and end up eating some junk that leaves us feeling tired and hungry? How do we actually plan our workouts in where they're not taken away from our ibadah, but they're also not taken away from our other priorities, and we're also not getting dehydrated and all that stuff, or extra hungry? And so, what sacrifices do we need to make, and what structure do we need to install? So there's a couple different times of day that you can work out, and really the most convenient 2 times, even if they're not necessarily the most optimal for everybody, just hunger, energy, hydration wise, are going to be right after Fajr and right before Maghrib, so right before Iftar. And the reason why these times work really well with our schedules is, right after Fajr, even though you just started your fast, and from a logistical perspective, like, you're going to get a little bit hungry and dehydrated, even if you keep it like, longer rest periods, you don't get your heart rate up too much, you don't sweat too much, you're still going to have some degree of hunger or dehydration, even if we try to minimize those things. But it does work really well because you just get it done between Fajr and work. So you're able to get it out of the way, and it actually does give you a little bit of a mood boost beginning of the day, even if you do potentially get a little hungry later in the day. Now, the reason why right before Iftar is great is that you get to eat right afterwards. It doesn't interfere with like our ibadah or family time or anything. But the downside is that you're really hungry, dehydrated, tired by that point. A lot of people would rather sleep than work out right before Iftar. So in the first week of Ramadan, you can test out multiple different ones if you've never worked out during Ramadan before. And then that way, by next Ramadan, you'll kind of know what works for you. But even so, you can always keep experimenting things. So those are kind of like the 2 times that typically work best, just from a schedule perspective for most busy professional parents who are trying to make the most out of Ramadan and not have it interfere with our ibadah. Now, for somebody who's more of a performance athlete, now we need to look at, okay, well, if we have a little more flexibility with our schedule, what other times can we look into potentially working out? So some people actually find that they still perform really well at the end of the fast, because some people, their body stores carbohydrates and energy for much longer. And the advantage to this is that if you are one of these people who's lucky enough to again have that blessing where even after a long fast, you're dehydrated, you haven't eaten food in a very long time, your body's still stored enough carbohydrates, enough energy, enough hydration that you can still perform better, if anything, at the end of the fast. Well, those people definitely work out right before Iftar because you're going to burn more fat. And if your performance is good, you're not sacrificing anything. But the thing is that not everybody has that blessing. And a lot of people like myself, or like many of my clients as well, feel the most depleted and tired, and their performance is the worst after a fast, or at the very end of the fast, to where their performance can be much better if they actually get some food in them before they train. So then there's kind of 2 other times that you can train. Well, actually, there's 4 other times you can train, but 2 of them are not the most realistic. But the 2 times that you could train after breaking the fast would be between Maghrib and Isha. The downside with this is that you're going to miss out on a little bit of family time, the family iftar, but that could be an upside, because let's say that your family eats really unhealthy food and you're trying to avoid that, then it could be an upside, but the barakah of spending family time that you're going to miss out on. So it is a game of sacrifices. And just to kind of zoom out before I talk about the other 3 times you could work out, so it's funny because a lot of people, they don't want to make sacrifices for fitness, right? They don't want to sacrifice eating pizza, biryani, ice cream, and gulab jamun every single night. But then what you end up sacrificing if you do that is you sacrifice your health, your youth, having a good body, having good energy levels, having a clean bill of health, not having to have doctor visits and medications when you're older. You're sacrificing being a good role model to your kids. You're sacrificing performing at your peak when it comes to work and living the highest quality life and being the best Muslim you can be. You sacrifice being able to take care of the amana Allah has given you, right? With respect, right? For the sake of Allah, which is a really powerful reason to be fit. So it's funny because it's a game of sacrifices. You're either sacrificing the best version of you, or you have to sacrifice some temporary pleasure. And that's one big thing in Islam is Islam teaches us to sacrifice that short-term pleasure for long-term gain. And my biggest thing with, fitness, and I know I'm going on some tangents. I'm going to finish off the point about like what time to work out and how to stay fit. I know you asked for some quick tips, but I'm not a quick tips guy. I'm a long, in-depth answer kind of guy, but hopefully it's valuable for the audience, inshallah.
No problem.
So back to the point though about like, okay, but how do you, especially because with your podcast being Halal Foodies, right? Of course, hey, I'm a foodie too. I love eating food that tastes good. So just because we're eating clean foods that are high protein and low calorie doesn't mean they have to taste bad. Doesn't mean they have to have a gross texture. Doesn't mean that they can't be flavorful and, have a great texture, and doesn't mean that you can't look forward to eating it. And so I'll send you this, Brother Irfan, after this podcast. You can share it with your group if you'd like, but I have this Ramadan recipe book PDF. It's like 45 pages.
Mm-hmm.
I put it out for free on my social media. I'm happy to share it with you guys for free as well, inshallah. It was originally only for my clients, but I mean, I just feel like so many Muslims need this. Like I've got samosa recipe, biryani recipe, because here's the thing,
nice.
like, if I have to sentence myself to not being able to enjoy foods that I like, or even if I even have to eat one thing I don't like the taste of, I'm not going to be as happy as I could be on my meal plan, and there's going to be some resistance. So everything I eat tastes good. What I have for breakfast, my high protein, either suhoor or breakfast outside of Ramadan, it tastes good. I look forward to it, right? Same thing with the meals, right? Now, of course, I might be tempted to eat some ice cream or something really oily, or like, some lamb chops with extra oil, deep fried, and then doused with more oil. I might be tempted to eat that. But the beautiful thing is that you start to realize that the 30 seconds of pleasure I have when I eat that super oily lamb chop is outweighed by the pain I'm going to experience for the next 24 hours, just being bloated, bad digestion, meat sweats, tired, lethargic, just bloated, like, feeling gross. And then also the subsequent gain in body fat that I'll experience if I eat that on a consistent basis. Of course, one can have a cheat meal once a week. I am a big fan of having a cheat meal once a week. In fact, I'm probably going to do lamb chops for my cheat meal tonight. But again, so it's important that you live a little, but that you discover a balance that allows you to achieve all of your priorities. And so that comes back to the topic of Ramadan, which is how to achieve a balance that allows us to achieve all of our priorities. Now, Ramadan, the priority is our ibadah, for sure, right? See, a lot of people that comment on my videos and they're like, oh, you shouldn't work out during Ramadan because it takes away from your ibadah. And I'm like, why do you have to have that all or nothing mindset? The two don't need to be mutually exclusive. Obviously, don't be running marathons and doing powerlifting competitions and 3-hour bodybuilding workouts with an hour of cardio afterwards inside of Ramadan. In fact, that's not even realistic for most people, even outside of Ramadan. It's not realistic for me, even as a fitness coach, to train 4 hours a day, right? Even though I'd love to if I could. So again, it's about creating that time efficiency. And I should have mentioned this earlier, and I'll talk about the other 3 times you could work out and their pros and cons. But when it comes to like what type of workout you should do during Ramadan, the 2 best ones are going to be a time efficient strength training workout. So low volume, not a whole lot of sets, just a couple, strength exercises. Take plenty of rest between sets so you don't end up like sweating and dehydrating yourself if you're training during the fast versus if you train after the fast. You could do a few more sets if you have time for it, or keep it time efficient. If you want to keep it like, let's say it's between Maghrib and Isha, you got to keep it like 30, 45 minutes tops, right? Make sure you're doing your warm up, of course, so you don't injure yourself. So don't rush that part. Don't skimp out on that. Even if you have to like spend 15 to 20 minutes working out or warming up and you only have another 20 minutes to work out, it's worth it because getting an injury is going to get you out of the gym. So it's important that you do warm up. And I have a free warm up PDF too. So I can send that to you after this as well. I got a ton of resources.
Okay, great.
Yes, so, please remind me to send the recipe book and the PDF. I'm almost done with this. I just wanted to make sure I thoroughly cover the rest of it. So strength training and then walking during the fast is very low impact. Just avoid going at the hottest part of the day. You'll dehydrate yourself. So quickly, I'll just finish off the last point because I know that you have more questions for me. But the other time you could work out is after Tarawih, where your performance is probably going to be the best because you've had some time to digest and assimilate whatever you ate, especially if you eat something clean, which we'll talk about a little bit later when we get into the iftar questions. And then obviously you could also train like right before Suhoor, but I can't wake up that early. I don't think anybody can wake up at 2 a.m. to train. People in the UK wake up at 1 a.m. Or you could train middle of the day, but it's very easy to get dehydrated. And I would only recommend that for a very elite athlete who's highly conditioned. So those are the 6 times that one could work out. Have another video on this as well, but I know that you got other questions, so I'll wrap it up there, inshallah.
A lot of questions that I have personally is when I'm starting the fast is, what should I eat for suhoor? Like even if people are not working out and they just want to have a good suhoor that will kind of last them most of the day, what do you suggest that are good suggestions for people to eat at
Yes.
suhoor time?
So there are a couple of different foods that work best. And I'm going to go through all of them in a second. But first, I want to explain the principle behind why these prevent you from getting hungry later in the day. So there's a couple of different reasons why we get hungry as human beings. And one of the biggest ones is when our blood sugar goes down. And so what happens is, let's say that we eat carbohydrates at suhoor. Some people, again, their bodies can kind of, burn through those carbohydrates a little more slowly, to where like if some people, they can eat oatmeal in the morning and they'll be full for the whole fast. So if that's you, like you just have, some oatmeal or something whole wheat, that could last you for the whole day. But if you're somebody who that doesn't last you for the whole day, you're probably somebody who oxidizes carbohydrates a little bit more quickly. And again, whole wheat bread or, yams or oatmeal, these are all like, complex carbohydrate sources. So they, again, can last a long time for somebody who's a slower carbohydrate oxidizer. But for somebody who's a fast carb oxidizer, which again, you'll know if you get hungry pretty frequently and you get hungry shortly after eating carbs versus somebody who eats carbs. Like some people can even eat dates, which is the sunnah for suhoor, and they'll be full all day. That is definitely not me. If I eat dates for suhoor, I'm hungry within an hour. So
Yeah.
for somebody like me who's a little more of a fast carb oxidizer, my blood sugar is going to go down if I eat carbs for suhoor. And then when my blood sugar goes down later in the fast and I'm fasting so I can't eat, I'm going to get hungry and tired. So for somebody like me or somebody else who, again, they're a fast carb oxidizer, they get hungry easily, especially after eating carbs. They notice that carbs maybe even stimulate your appetite. You want to avoid carbs at suhoor and instead eat something that's really high in protein and moderate in healthy fats. And what that's going to do is it's going to prevent that carb crash. The fats and protein are going to last you a very long time. So you basically don't even get hungry during the fast. And all you really need to worry about is hydration. So what are some foods that a person can do if that's you, or just like how it is for me, right? So I always do eggs. Now, eggs are not always the most appetizing at 3 a.m. They're appetizing at 8 a.m., but they're not that appetizing at 3 a.m. But at least for me. But what you could do is you could either do like boiled eggs, just, eat them real quick. You could also do some scrambled eggs or over easy. I like doing it over easy because then it has a creamy texture. So that makes it taste a lot better. So it's a lot easier to get them down. And of course, add salt to your eggs, because if you add salt and you drink enough water, the salt actually helps you to retain that hydration. Obviously, don't overdo it to where you need to drink like 6 cups of water at suhoor, because it's hard to have 6 cups of water at suhoor. But add a little bit of salt to it and then have, 4 cups of water at suhoor. And that's a reasonable amount to help keep you hydrated, versus some people think, oh, I can't add salt to my food at all because of blood pressure. And, the government says you can only eat like 1 gram of sodium a day max. And I just don't add sodium to anything. That's why you're getting dehydrated. Now, just one thing to note, the way that you can offset whatever blood pressure increase you get from eating sodium, what you can do is you can just eat more foods that have potassium, like potatoes and carrots and bananas and dates, right? You can, and you don't have to eat this at the same time as suhoor. I recommend more of these for iftar because they're carb sources, right? But those are high potassium foods that offset some of the sodium blood pressure issues. Make sure that you get magnesium. So red meat actually has a lot of magnesium. Just keep the red meats lean so that you can avoid the cholesterol issues with saturated fat. And then calcium. So if you tolerate dairy well, some people that get issues with lactose, like I get issues with lactose, so I can't drink milk, but I could do like a lactose-free milk, or I really like Greek yogurt. It's one of my favorite suhoor foods actually is zero sugar Greek yogurt, which there's actually one Chobani zero sugar, tastes absolutely amazing because they still make it sweet using stevia. And they have like some really great flavors like cookies and milk. I'm telling you, man, that flavor is like the most amazing thing ever. Cookies and milk flavored yogurt. So
I'll have to try that.
Yes, I told you guys I'm a foodie. So like getting the calcium, magnesium, potassium offsets whatever blood pressure increase you get from the sodium, and the sodium is very important for hydration, energy levels, regular function. So anyways, add salt to your eggs, not like a crazy amount to where you need 6 cups of water because then you'll get dehydrated, but have a little bit of salt to where, 3-4 cups of water at suhoor. That's reasonable. You'll be more hydrated all day. Eggs are great. Greek yogurt, like I said, zero sugar Greek yogurt, because if you have Greek yogurt with sugar, you're going to get that same carb issue that I talked about before that afflicts, I would say, most people oxidize carbs fast enough that it's better for probably a larger percent of people to not have carbs at suhoor versus, there's a significant percentage of people who they can eat carbs at suhoor and be full all day as long as it's a long-lasting carb. So eggs, Greek yogurt, whey protein is also a very good addition to your suhoor. Now understand that when you eat more protein, you also do need more water. So that's why I usually have about 4 cups of water total with my suhoor. I drink a little bit of water before suhoor too. Like when I wake up, I'll have like 2 cups of water. I'll go down, I'll have my suhoor, and with my suhoor, including the water I add to the protein shake, I'll do 3 or 4 cups. And those are probably the 3 easiest foods to eat at suhoor because the Greek yogurt tastes good. Over easy eggs are nice and creamy, or however you like your eggs. Whey protein is easy to drink. Now, Some other foods that will last you a very long time at suhoor, but are really hard to eat: steak, salmon, chicken. Like again, it's as much as I love the idea of eating steak every morning. Steak tastes good at like 7 a.m., 8 a.m., but steak doesn't taste so good at 3 a.m., 2 a.m. And it takes a while to prep. You could also make like kebabs or some low carb chicken nuggets would be really good for suhoor. And again, I'm not anti carb by any means. Just for suhoor, I advocate not having carbs. However, at iftar, which we'll get to that in another question, that's where I advocate for actually very low fats, but in that case, higher carbs, so you can replenish the carbs you depleted during the fast. We'll talk about that in the next question. So these are kind of my suhoor recommendations: is again, eggs, Greek yogurt, whey protein, maybe some kebabs, maybe some lean meats, whatever it may be. I generally stay away from carbs at suhoor, and for the people who do like carbs at suhoor and who they actually stay full on carbs, I really like yams, oatmeal, potatoes as well, sweet potato. These are all good foods that you could do, or even whole wheat bread if you don't get digestive issues from gluten. Dates is the sunnah, but again, dates just seem to last so short in your stomach that if you're trying to avoid hunger, and some people actually prefer to get more hungry during the fast, so they feel more pain, and they do that for the sake of Allah to get more, good deeds that they're putting themselves in pain. But if your goal is to avoid hunger, those are my recommendations.
I actually, over the years, I've kind of got more difficult for me to not drink anything, like especially water, because the food, once after a couple of days, your stomach gets used to the schedule, but then, the water and drinking something and your mouth gets all dry. That's the part that kind of is difficult for me during fast. A question from Abbas, who's my co-host here, who's a coffee addict. So what is your suggestion for people who are how to kind of wean off that before? Obviously they should start before Ramadan, so then it's less painful. But what are your tips? So should people drink coffee and tea during suhoor, or should they just do it, wait till iftar time?
So when it comes to caffeine and coffee around suhoor time and during Ramadan, the best protocol is indeed to taper off of it a couple weeks out. But since we're only less than 2 weeks out now, inshallah, which is really exciting, because I'm actually very excited for Ramadan, we're going to have to take a little bit of a different strategy since we don't have adequate time to completely taper off of caffeine to the level that I would advocate if, let's say, we were 4 to 6 weeks out. So the first thing that you got to do is you got to understand that caffeine as a compound, regardless of whether it's in coffee or tea, does cause your kidneys to produce more urine, which is part of why it makes you pee and potentially dehydrate yourself if you consume caffeine during suhoor prior to your fast. However, if you're somebody who's completely addicted to caffeine, you could just muscle it out and have a headache for a couple of days, but that just makes it really miserable. And I actually feel like that takes away from ibadah. And I'm actually a big fan of having coffee. I, alhamdulillah, usually pray tahajjud every morning. And I find that when I have caffeine before tahajjud, my prayer is always much deeper, much more focused, which is why I typically advocate for it. And I don't mind doing caffeine during Ramadan, but the way we utilize caffeine needs to be a little more intelligent. So let's look at coffee now. So we've established that caffeine does dehydrate you, regardless if it's coffee, green tea, whatever it may be, pre-workout, green tea extract, whatever it is. But coffee itself is a little bit acidic, which is part of why a lot of people do notice that after having coffee, you might get a little bit bloated, you might get a little bit gassy, you might get a little bit extra dehydrated compared to other sources of caffeine, even if the caffeine is equal, because again, coffee itself is a little bit acidic. Now, some people say, oh, well, it's only low quality coffees. And yes, obviously higher, like if you get like Folgers is like that, prison coffee. That's what they get prison coffee. So obviously avoid Folgers. That's a given. But even if you're getting the most nice, expensive coffee, now the most nice, expensive coffee will give you an amazing caffeine buzz, but it's still a little bit acidic and it's still going to cause potentially some issues. So what I would actually pivot to, is actually matcha green tea. Okay. Now the reason why I like matcha green tea is it doesn't have that acidity and it doesn't really seem to affect your gut health the way that coffee seems to. And I'm sure somebody will cite a study out there that, oh, coffee is good for your gut health in this study, but everybody's different, right? There might be somebody who they have tea and they get issues, but they have coffee and their gut health is fine. But what I've noticed with myself, as well as many people who I've worked with and many people who I know, is coffee does seem to cause a little bit more bloatedness and gassiness. So if you can, and more dehydration than green tea. So you could switch to matcha green tea. It's still nice and strong. It's actually very delicious. It gives you that same like warm beverage feeling, the same caffeine, but it's not going to dehydrate you as much. Now, of course, caffeine still makes your kidneys produce more urine, so you are still going to get a little dehydrated. But again, if you follow the other tips about like sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and you're taking care of, again, those electrolytes, and you're getting a good micronutrient dense diet, which we can talk more about, especially when we talk about iftar. We've already talked a little bit about it in suhoor. Then again, you're going to be pretty good on hydration. Then just obviously drink enough water as well. Usually our thirst mechanism is enough when it comes to water, although in Ramadan it gets a little skewed because we're not drinking all day. But so I can give some general recommendations on that a little bit later. But yeah, when it comes to caffeine, you can still do caffeine before the fast. I just always do green tea based caffeine because I don't want the extra dehydrating effects that coffee seems to have on myself as well as many other people.
So you're half Pakistani. So what about the doodh patti, the karak chai made out of milk? What about that?
Yeah, so a lot of the milk and sugar, back to the principle about suhoor, right? If we're doing milk and sugar, because like whether you're a slow carb oxidizer or a fast carb oxidizer, sugar hits your bloodstream so fast and you crash so fast that you're going to get hungry and tired pretty early into the fast, even if you're somebody who processes carbs very slowly. So I would definitely stay away from these extremely indulgent, unhealthy things. Like it's funny because a lot of people think that every time you eat needs to be some indulgent party. It doesn't have to be a party every single time.
Mhm.
Sometimes you got to eat for
Yeah.
function. And that doesn't mean it needs to taste bad, but it means that, okay, if you want to have something that tastes a 10 out of 10, 100% of the time, that's a little bit unreasonable, especially if it's unhealthy. But what if you could have something that tastes a 7 or an 8 out of 10 that's 10 out of 10 healthy? That's a much better trade-off, in my opinion, than something that's 10 out of 10 taste, but 0 out of 10 health / function / energy levels. I mean, the pain I would experience from being, hungry, tired, and dehydrated into my fast is so much greater than the pain I experience by eating something that's a 7 or an 8 out of 10 than a 10 out of 10, that the 7 or 8 out of 10 just is a no-brainer for me to eat that as opposed to something that's a 10 out of 10 but makes me feel like a 0 out of 10, if that makes sense.
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna definitely try to avoid the chais and the coffees at least for suhoor time myself, and I'll try this what you suggested about the matcha green tea. So let's go to the iftar time. So obviously the as we were talking about, a lot of people, they go very buck wild, indulgent, and crazy, especially the first few days of fasting, because they're just thinking about food the whole time, and so what's the best way to what's the best food, sorry, to break your fast with?
Yes. So when it comes to iftar, the perfect balance is to make stuff that tastes just like the traditional classics, but has a nutrition profile that's a 10 out of 10 as opposed to a nutritional profile that's a 0 out of 10. So what do I mean by that? Well, first let's talk about the nutritional principle. Then we'll talk about how to make all the favorites like pakoras, samosas, lentil soup, biryani, whatever else it may be, in a healthy way that fits the parameters of being 10 out of 10 nutritionally. So what are the best things to eat for iftar? Well, I always advocate having first a date because, again, that's a sunnah, but also dates have potassium. They have, some good carbohydrates that are going to kind of replenish you after you've had the fast. The potassium is going to help hydrate you. And I always recommend doing that with a protein shake, especially because, again, all my clients, we have them, do some sort of resistance training, whether it's body weight or whether it's, resistance training, lifting weights at the gym. So really, really important that we're getting in that protein because our body's been deprived of protein all day. And this is how we can prevent ourselves from losing muscle in addition to getting that date. So it's kind of like the sunnah was dates and milk. And again, you could do dates and milk, especially if it's like, low fat milk, if you tolerate lactose well. But if you get issues with lactose or you're trying to just have a greater protein content and a lower calorie content, whey protein tastes great along with, breaking your fast with a date. So then after that, pray maghrib, right? That way your appetite can kind of digest that and also satiate itself before, instead of going straight into a meal, being ravenously hungry and overeating, right? And then you end up being tired and you don't make it to tarawih and you're bloated and you neglected the sunnah of 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 because you were just so focused on your desires after being deprived all day that you kind of ruin the purpose of Ramadan in a lot of ways, which is to say no to our desires and build more discipline, which helps us be better Muslims year round. So anyways, then pray maghrib, right? Then after maghrib or even before maghrib, just drink plenty of water. And now we filled our stomach with 1/3 water. So now we can fill it with 1/3 food, right? Because I'm sure you've heard of the hadith: 1/3 for food, 1/3 for water, 1/3
Yes.
for your breath. So very important. And then next up, what we want to do is after you've done that, now your appetite's not going to be so ravenous. So now we want to eat something that's low in fat, medium carbohydrates, high in protein as well. Now, this can be difficult if somebody has traditionally prepared something, and I'll talk about what to do if you're at a family house and there's no healthy food available. But the problem with all the deep fried stuff is that if you're eating such a high dose of fats after your stomach hasn't had anything in all day, not only does your stomach now have to produce, or sorry, your pancreas now have to produce all these different enzymes, and your stomach has to produce hydrochloric acid. Now all the blood flow comes out of your brain, out of your extremities, and into your stomach to try to digest it. And you end up eating such a large dose, so just all your blood flow, your energy levels absolutely tank. You get super bloated, you get super tired. Then you're drinking all this water because you're dehydrated, and then all that water sits with all that salt and fat and carbs and everything. And you just get incredibly bloated. You get gassy. If you do manage to make it to Tarawih, even though you're all tired, you end up, having to hold in your wudu the whole time, and it's just a miserable situation. Versus if you just do a medium dose of carbs, so about 40 to 50 grams of carbs, which is about half a cup of rice, or 2 cups of diced potato, or 8 ounces of potato, so like a medium potato size potato, right? Or sweet potato if you prefer sweet potato, although I prefer regular potato personally. Those are some reasonable carbs we could do. Could also be like, 2 pieces of bread. I mean, depending on the size, of course, if you don't get any issues from bread, and just do that with half a pound of lean meat, like chicken breast. And you can prepare that curry style. Just don't put excess oil in it, because then that's kind of defeating the purpose of doing a lean meat. Could be sirloin steak, although red meat does take a little bit more blood flow to digest, it seems like. That's why hijama practitioners, don't have you do red meat 24 hours after hijama, because, the blood flow. You could do some lean fish, even some fatty fish like salmon, although fatty fish does seem to take more resources to digest because, again, it's got more fats, more calories, and then combined with the carbs and the proteins could be a lot. But if we just do some cod could work well, especially if you don't digest chicken well, because some people get digestive issues with chicken. Chicken breast or, cod, a lean fish, maybe tuna, that could be great. Now, let's say that you want to do something more traditional. You could also make, lean beef samosas, lean chicken samosas, right? And the way that I make it in the air fryer, where you don't just buy the packet of samosas that are deep fried and then you air fry them. No, you make samosas homemade, especially if you don't get issues with gluten. You can just buy what's it called? Like the samosa pastry.
Yeah, the wrapper.
The wrapper, exactly. Yeah, like what I get is I get egg roll wrappers, like the Asian one. It's got like a dragon on the front, but it's good for making samosas and for making boreks, which is just traditional Algerian food that I'm sure some of your listeners will know of. And you can just put some lean meat in that, make it in the air fryer, light little spray. It's low fat. Oh my God, it tastes so good. It's so crunchy. It's delicious. It's flavorful. It's tender. I'm getting hungry right now just thinking about it. I just ate, right? There. See, I'm a foodie, guys. I'm telling you. And then from there, you actually feel good. You don't feel bloated. You don't feel gassy. You go to Tarawih and you feel like a pro. You're focused, right? You're able to listen to the Quran, absorb it fully. After Tarawih, you have energy to work out if you want to work out, or you come home and you feel good, as opposed to like, I have to go to Tarawih, but I want to take a nap. You know what I mean? So you can also do my biryani recipe. It's very, lean, it's low fat, so it fits the same parameters. You're not going to get crazy bloated. The only thing is my biryani recipe tastes so good. Same with the samosa one, that you might end up overeating, so be careful with that. But again, so that's those are some options for you. I actually have a chicken pakora recipe. It's not in the book, but it's coming out soon. Inshallah, I'll probably do a video on it for Ramadan. But yeah, there's a lot of great options that you can do that taste exactly like traditional foods. Your family will barely be able to tell the difference. Like I made halim, right? And I make halim like low fat as well. My beef halim is amazing. The chicken one is good too. Some people prefer chicken halim. I prefer beef halim, and my beef halim is so good. Even my grandparents love it. My grandparents are in their 70s, from Pakistan. Like they're the last person who would like something that's that lean. They like my biryani. They like my halim, and they would be honest with me if it needed some oil. They did add salt to it once because I wanted a little more salty, but that's the only thing they've added. They didn't have to add oil. So alhamdulillah.
Very good. Very good. Yeah, I like beef too. I always joke with some of the restaurant owners that I know that when they make chicken halim or chicken nihari, I'm saying, what kind of bid'ah is this? This is not good. It has to be beef.
One aspect of Ramadan, actually, late night snacking. That's another one that I think is worth addressing. Yes. Because I'm pretty OCD, man, as you could probably tell. So I want to be thorough. So another big mistake people make during Ramadan like the general mistake people make is they consume calorie dense foods and they aren't strategic with their appetite, their recipes, their prep, all that stuff. Oh, and then I'll also quickly address like what to do if you're at a family iftar. So if you're at a family iftar, you have to understand everything is cooked with a lot of oil. So you probably, won't be able to do the whole lean meat strategy I had before. And so one principle that I want you guys to all understand is that when you do something that's high in carbs, you want to keep the fats lower, because otherwise, if both carbs and fats are high, the calories are too high, and vice versa. If something is high in fat, we want to keep the carbs lower. Okay. I'm not an advocate for low carb. I actually, for iftar, advocate a lower fat, higher carb, because it's going to give you more energy. Carbs are very important for energy, and carbs are actually harder for your body to store as fat, which is another advantage. But if you're in a situation where everything is cooked in a lot of oil, aka a family iftar, then you should probably bring the carbs down and avoid the carbs at a family iftar and instead focus on the proteins. So there's always usually going to be some kind of meat, so load up on meat. Hopefully there's a salad. If there's vegetables that are cooked in excess oil, it's probably going to be too many calories, make you feel really bloated, especially with the fiber plus the fats. It's going to be a lot in your stomach. But if you just do a bunch of meat at iftar, you can eat like a pound of like meat, like eat a pound of lamb, eat a pound of chicken legs, right? Now you've got 100 grams of protein roughly. Well, with the lamb, it's a little bit less because there's just so much fat in lamb. So generally try to stay away from the lamb, advocate more for chicken. But, now you've gotten high protein, the calories aren't too high, so it allows you to eat something healthy. So that's the family iftar strategy in a nutshell. And then, or the outside eating or eating out. Now, the strategy for when you come home from Tarawih, if you're somebody who's a late night snacker, a lot of people want to snack on nuts because they think nuts are healthy. Nuts are healthy. They have magnesium, they have healthy fats. But the problem is it's very easy to eat 1,000 calories of nuts. If you mindlessly snack on nuts, munching, before you know, you've eaten 500,000 calories and now you're gaining body fat. So what I actually recommend is back to those Chobani zero sugar Greek yogurts, man. So delicious, so sweet, satisfies all the sweet cravings. Eating some kanafa or gulab jamun or whatever you eat at night, it's much better. So that's just to cover the last points on nutrition. Now I'm ready for the question.
Okay, good. Can you still hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. So one thing that's popped in my head, actually, I've been, I watch a lot of videos on social media, and there's a couple of people, one particular guy who's advocating to eat fruits, fruit diet. So what is your take on fruits? Like, usually for iftar time, people eat some fruits, but then even outside of Ramadan, people who have high sugar diabetic issues, sometimes the doctors say to avoid certain fruits and things like that because of the sugar. But then I've heard other people say that no, that kind of sugar from fruits is actually good for you, fructose. And so what is your opinion on that?
Yeah, so for somebody who's a diabetic, you have to stick with low glycemic index carbohydrates, which means they hit your bloodstream slower, which means that you're not going to get this crazy spike in blood sugar that you now have to take insulin for. And I'm assuming we're talking about type 2 diabetics, who are people who their insulin sensitivity, their pancreas produces insulin. It's just they have a lot of insulin resistance. So yeah, if you have a lot of insulin resistance, first off, start resistance training. So when you lift weights or you do even body weight strength training, it's going to improve your insulin sensitivity a lot and lose body fat, and possibly use a little bit of carb cycling to solve it. A lot of things we can do to solve it, but I know that wasn't the question, so I won't go too deep into that. But if you are going to eat carbohydrates, eat low glycemic index carbohydrates. So basmati rice actually has a low glycemic index, so you can actually have a moderate quantity of basmati rice. Obviously, if you eat 10 plates of basmati rice, the total glycemic load of that many carbs, your insulin, it's going to be very bad for somebody who's insulin resistant. Yeah, just do low glycemic index carbohydrates and avoid anything that has a high glycemic index. So all you gotta do is just Google it. So it's like, should I eat this gulab jamun? Let me search up gulab jamun, glycemic index. And maybe it won't have it, but you could say, okay, well, what is gulab jamun made of? It's syrup. Okay, let's search up high fructose corn syrup, glycemic index. Oh, wow, 90. That's really high, right? Or whatever high fructose corn syrup is, or whatever kind of syrup, right? Versus, let's say you're like, basmati rice. Let me search that up. Glycemic index. Oh, it's between 50 and 58. That's considered low. Okay, great. I can eat basmati rice, right? Or like, blackberry. Blackberry, it's sugar, but let me search it up. Oh, blackberry is very low glycemic index. I think it's like 35 or something crazy low like that. Okay, great. I can eat blackberries, right? So that's my recommendation. But yeah, as far as fruits go, they're a great source of carbs. Especially for the average person. I mean, it's good for your liver. It stimulates your liver. Fruits are very good. They have, fiber as well, which is very good. It can help with digestion. I actually have a client who he likes to eat, instead of eating like rice or potatoes or whatever else for iftar, his carb of choice, he gets this giant fruit bowl, like amazing, huge fruit bowl. We calculated the calories and we were able to make it fit his diet, where he just eats this enormous bowl of fruits for iftar, and it works, right? So fruits, there's no issue with fruits. It just needs to be accounted for within your daily calories. Like there's no bad foods. There's just some foods that are easier to overeat than others. Like nuts, for instance, are a good food. They're actually healthy, but they're so easy to overeat that's why I usually do not include nuts in a weight loss plan. It is actually something that if you have like 1 ounce of nuts, which would be like 7 walnuts or about 20 almonds, that's something you could actually have for suhoor that will help keep you full for the day.
Let's talk a little bit in general about what does Islam teach about being healthy and fit? Is it part of our, is part of the Sunnah that Prophet Muhammad SAW taught, and what does Islam say about taking care of your body?
Yeah, absolutely. So when it comes to our bodies, right? So the first thing I'd like to ask everybody here is, if I had a really, really nice car, let's say it's a BMW or let's say it's a Bugatti, right? And I let you borrow it, right? I just said, hey, you know what? I'm going to give you this car. You can borrow it for free. Just, you are going to have to return it to me in a couple of years, but like, just borrow this car, man. Just take it, right? You'd be like, wow, thank you so much. Would you return that car to me having used cheap fuel that ruined the insides, return it to me all dinged up, return it to me in really bad condition? Probably not, if you're an ethical person. So the thing is, Allah has given us our bodies, and if we return it to Allah in poor condition because we've put in low quality fuel inside of it instead of taking care of it, we return it to Him all dinged up, messed up because we didn't take care of it, we neglected it. I would hope that you have more respect for Allah than you have for me, right? Or that you have for your best friend, because Allah is the master of the day of judgment, right? He's the creator of all things. He's the Lord of the worlds, right? He's the one who gave us all everything that we have. So you got to treat that body with respect. And for those who maybe value material possessions more so than they value their bodies, let me ask you this. Let's say I gave you a Bugatti to keep, but tomorrow you have to chop off your arm. Would you take that trade? No, you wouldn't, because you value your arm more than a Bugatti. Well, you got 2 arms, man. You got 2 Bugattis, $5 million car, right? So, think about how much value we have for our bodies, yet we do not treat our bodies to the value that they're worth. We do not respect our bodies that we must return to Allah. And I know that sometimes it can feel very intangible, where it's like, oh yeah, well, the day of judgment, I've heard it's 50,000 years. I heard that, you could either be in the shade of Allah if you were one of these virtuous people, or you could be in the scorching heat, but it's so far away. But the thing is, the day of judgment is a real thing. We're Muslims and we believe in the day of judgment. And that's something that holds me accountable. Like whenever I'm rushing in my prayer, I might rush the first 2 rakats, and then I remember, wait a second, I'm praying to the master of the day of judgment right now. And on the day of judgment, I'm going to regret so hard that I didn't focus on my prayer right now, because I'm going to be punished. I'm going to be held accountable for everything bad I do. Let's say I'm at the gym and I'm tempted, to look at something that I shouldn't. No, I'm going to lower my gaze, because guess what? The master of the day of judgment is watching me at all times, and I'm going to be held accountable, right? And so I ask Allah to pardon us and forgive us for all of our sins, and to protect us from committing more sins. So taking it back to the body. So when we think about it from that perspective, that this is the body that the master of the day of judgment, the master of the afterlife gave to us, we got to treat this body with respect. So that's the first thing I'll say. The second thing I'll say is, let's look at the example of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam was in his 50s, okay, most of us, we're decrepit in our 50s. We got posture issues, back issues, big belly. We're sitting in front of the computer all day, belching, barely have our health in order. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, who was busier than us, he had more wives than any of us, right? Even those of us who have 4 wives, he had more than that, because he was, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, right? So he had that many wives to take care of. He had an entire, nation to take care of, right? He had the da'wah that he was doing. He was leading the prayers. He was running his business. He was doing way more than any of us. Yet, instead of making excuses that he didn't have time, the man was fit enough to dig graves in his 50s. He was digging graves in his 50s, guys. He was digging graves in his 50s. How many of us in our 50s or even in our 30s can have the strength to dig a grave? If you ever tried digging a grave, it's hard, man. Even I would struggle to dig a grave, and I'm a big jack 28-year-old, alhamdulillah. So the Prophet and all of the Sahaba, may Allah be pleased with all of them, right? They could ride horses without a saddle, right? They were strong. They could carry 2 swords into battle. They would fight battles while they were fasting. Yet the modern Muslim is, and when I say modern Muslim, I don't mean my brand. I mean the Muslims who live in the modern age. Most of us are barely fit to walk up a flight of stairs without being winded. So, I think it's very important that we take care of our health, and that, especially, so I'll say this. we all have so first it's the duties that we have and the rights of Allah, right? But then we also got to think about the rights of our family. What kind of example we're setting for our kids? If we don't even have the energy to function, we can't even walk up a flight of stairs without being winded. We can't even control the desires of what we put in our mouth. How are we going to control our desires and sin and tell our kids to avoid haram? How are we going to tell our kids to avoid their desires to go do haram things if we don't even have the desire to avoid the halal things of eating unhealthy foods that damage our bodies, right? So like, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I can't remember the exact verse, but, eat of the good, wholesome things that are on this earth, but do not commit excess. This is important. The sunnah, the 1/3, 1/3, 1/3 rule, right? And actually, if you look at that entire hadith, it's something like, and search it up, but the son of Adam, sufficient for him is to eat just a few morsels of food. And if he must fill himself with 1/3 food, 1/3 air, 1/3, water, right? But just a few morsels of food, yet we overeat, right? So, or like the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he, when I think it was Aisha radiallahu anha, when she was, really young, she was able to run faster than him. But then when she got a little bit older and she put on some weight, he could run faster than her, even though he was getting old too. So he took care of his health, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So when we as Muslims, we should strive to be as best we can, to be like the prophets in every single way, including fitness, right? Of course, mostly in deen and worshiping Allah, that's the most important thing. But then we also got to look at, fitness, health, everything else. How do we treat our families? That's, a big one for all of us. It's very easy to take our families for granted, but we got to treat our families the best. And there's a hadith as well. The best of you is the one who is the best to his family. I believe it's a hadith. I would have to double check because I'm paraphrasing all these, but it's very important that we conduct ourselves with the best character. So for the modern man or woman who's sitting there in their computer right now listening to this, or laying in bed, I know it can be daunting. I know it can be hard to start building up, but just start taking little steps. Go for a 10-minute walk, just do a little bit of stretching, just build those little habits and build yourself up, and you'll be astounded by how far you can get in a year. Like, for instance, Brother Irfan, you've been doing this for about 6 months now. And how do you feel ever since you started working out about 6 months ago? You feel better?
Oh yeah, definitely feel more energetic. If you're after you get you get more muscle, you lose more belly fat, and so definitely feel better and look better, and alhamdulillah, it's very good. So I highly recommend everybody do some exercise and not just eat like what I've been doing most of my life.
And the best thing is, when you work out and you eat these savory, high protein meat dishes, you gain muscle from it instead of gaining fat. So you get to have the best of both worlds. Alhamdulillah.
Oh yeah, definitely. So speaking of this diet fads that are going around, a lot of people have been advocating this popular one called the keto diet. So where I think it's mostly eating a lot of protein and reducing your carbs, or sometimes even completely cutting out carbs as much as possible.
Yeah.
So I've seen people do that, and I haven't done that personally myself. I have done in the past, what you call a low carb, low sugar diet, which is similar but not exactly the same thing as a keto diet.
Mm-hmm.
Well, what's your opinion on the keto diet, and is it something that people should try, or is it kind of like just a waste of time and they should focus on trying to do a more balanced meal?
So I think people should do more of a balanced meal, because here's the thing. So the keto diet has a couple advantages, but many disadvantages, and the disadvantages outweigh the advantages. So what are the advantages? One advantage is it does control your appetite a bit, because your blood sugar is less up and down because you're not eating carbs. So you will have a little bit of a less appetite. And another advantage is that you'll lose a lot of water weight, which can be really exciting. But again, it's just water weight, because when you're not consuming carbohydrates, and the ketogenic diet by definition is eating under 30 grams of carbohydrates a day, right? Typically, those carbohydrates are coming from foods that have trace amounts of carbs, like broccoli or different vegetables that don't have that much carbs, as opposed to, like, you're not having a couple grains of rice on the ketogenic diet. That's kind of, rice is a proper carb source, versus usually the carbs you're eating on a keto diet are going to be trace carbs. But yeah, so you'll drop a little bit of water weight, which is kind of neutral. It's neither an advantage nor a disadvantage. I mean, there's actually some disadvantages to dropping water weight, because you think that you lost fat, but you actually didn't lose any fat. But and then the third advantage would be that some people actually notice that their energy levels are much better overall on the ketogenic diet. So those are the three advantages. Now, here are the disadvantages. Number one, sustainability. Nobody wants to cut out carbs. Everybody likes carbs, and our bodies like carbs, and our brain prefers to run on glucose as opposed to running on ketones, which when you eat less than 30 grams of carbs a day, eventually your brain starts producing ketones from fat, which your brain will run on alternatively instead of running on glucose, which glucose is derived from carbs. So that's the first disadvantage. It's not very sustainable, especially if you're like Pakistani, Middle Eastern, really any Muslim culture, even like non-Muslim cultures. Like every culture likes carbs. There's a reason why we as human beings like carbs, and it's because our bodies prefer to run on them. And that leads us into disadvantage number 2, is that a lot of people, their athletic performance will drop severely in the absence of carbohydrates. Now, again, there are always anomalies, and there are some people whose athletic performance is actually better on a ketogenic diet. What I've noticed with most people, including myself, including many of my clients, is when we drop carbs lower, performance absolutely suffers, especially weirdly enough on bench press and chest day. It seems to be the most carb dependent lifting day when it comes to performance. Like I actually had a joke this morning because today was my chest day where I carved up pretty heavily beforehand because I was actually in a dieting phase a couple weeks ago where I went a little too low in carbs and my chest performance absolutely tanked. And I had another client who had the same thing happen to him. And I think there was one other client who when we went a little lower in calories, his bench performance tanked. So I actually upped his carbs and lowered his fat so we could still be in a deficit, but on a much lower fat diet so we can keep carbs higher so that he had much better performance on bench. So I tagged both of them. I was like, let's see how my performance is today. And it was decent, alhamdulillah, because I carved up. So so that's another thing, is just athletic performance wise. So number 1, sustainability. Number 2, athletic performance and energy levels in general. Now, weirdly enough, just a quick side note to that, earlier in this podcast, I do advocate for doing a somewhat ketogenic suhoor because it's going to control your appetite, which is one of the advantages of keto. But I advocate for eating carbs at iftar because I advocate for having carbs in your system in general because it's going to boost athletic performance and energy levels. And also carbs do seem to be beneficial for the metabolism. And another thing with keto is, so here's the thing. There are tracer studies that show that 98% of our body fat comes from dietary fats. Only 2% of our body fat comes from dietary carbohydrates. So if you're in a calorie surplus and you're eating more fats than carbs, you're going to store more body fat, versus if you're in a calorie surplus and you're eating more carbs than fats, you're going to have less fat storage because it's harder for your body to store carbohydrates as fat than it is to store fat as fat. Okay. Now, and that is another disadvantage with keto, is when you lose all that water weight, you might think that you're in deficit because you're seeing the scale go down. But the reality is you could actually be in a surplus, because the reality is this: in order to lose weight, you just have to be in a calorie deficit, and ideally a sustainable deficit, because if it's not sustainable, you're going to gain all the weight back. And that's why a lot of people gain all the weight back after keto is, number 1, it's not sustainable. So they eventually fall off and then they start eating carbs, and just a couple of bad days, like you have one day of carbs on keto, you'll gain 5 to 10 pounds because you gain back all that water weight that you lost through carb depletion. The only way that keto can work is if you're in an actual deficit. So let's say that your basal metabolic rate, like my basal, I'll use myself as an example. My basal metabolic rate is 2,000 calories. So that's how many calories I burn if I'm just laying down all day, right? Now, if I burn another, 800 calories on top of that from activity levels, let's say my Apple Watch is accurate, and let's say that it says 800, calories per day, then I'm burning 2,800 calories per day. Now, let's say I eat 2,300 calories per day. There's now a deficit of 500 because I'm burning 500 more than how much I'm eating. And 2,300 is a decent amount to eat, by the way. So you're not really going to be hungry, especially if you're strategic and eat filling foods. Like you could drink a cup of olive oil, and that's probably about 2,300 calories right there. So you can eat it all in one day. But I wouldn't recommend that. I'd recommend, I could eat 200 grams of carbs. That's probably 10 cups of potatoes. It's roughly 10 cups of potatoes, because 2 cups of potatoes is 50 grams of carbs. Sorry, 8 cups of potatoes, right? 8 cups of potatoes is a lot, like diced potatoes. And then from there, I could eat 2 pounds of lean meat, like chicken breast, and I could have a bunch of veggies too. And that's, let's see, 400, that's only 1,600 calories. Now I have room for more. So, but if I'm eating a lot of fats, see, the other disadvantage is that fats have 9 calories per gram. Carbs and proteins only have 4 calories per gram. So the total volume of foods you can eat is a lot less because the fats just add up so much quicker, which is another reason I'm not a big fan of keto. And I'm usually a fan of a lower fat diet, as are most leaders in the nutrition space when it comes to weight loss and athletic performance. And then the next thing is, so those would be kind of the main disadvantages. And I think that alone is enough disadvantages for most people. Oh man, I don't have less energy, less performance in the gym, not be able to eat as much food volume, just so that I can feel a little bit less hungry. And that's the biggest problem with keto people, is they think that there's some magic that if you don't eat carbs, your insulin levels drop, and then you can magically not be in a calorie deficit and still lose weight. No, you still have to be in a calorie deficit. And usually it's an accidental calorie deficit because your appetite drops enough that on a ketogenic diet, you will usually eat a little bit less total calories, unless you're loading up with fats. See, a lot of keto people, they put like extra, oil on everything. They add extra avocado to everything, which avocado is a healthy fat. But if you're eating 10 avocados a day, that's 3,600 calories. Each avocado has 360 calories roughly on average. So if you eat 10 avocados a day, that's 3,600 calories. Plus you eat like 2 pounds of ribeye steak a day. Yeah, maybe you're getting 200 grams of protein, but you're also getting a boatload of fats. So again,
Yeah.
all of the fats are going to add up, and you might lose some water weight, but then your net result is you're going to be, if you lose any weight, you'll gain it back because it's not sustainable. And you might actually gain body fat even though you're dropping water weight. And then you're like, what happened? I was doing this keto thing. Why didn't it work? Well, maybe you should have actually learned how to calculate your calories properly and get into a real deficit in a more sustainable way. And that's ultimately what we focus on, is creating a sustainable deficit depending on what are your taste buds, what do you like. Obviously with like diabetics or people who have a high, they have, a high A1C, they have insulin resistance, all that stuff. We do utilize a little bit of carb depletion to improve that insulin sensitivity. And obviously we do use a little, obviously resistance training with every client because that increases insulin sensitivity. But, there's no magic to keto. It's not going to magically make you lose weight in a deficit or lose fat in a deficit. You'll lose water weight, but you will not lose weight. And you'll probably end up worse off than you started if you do keto, unless you're very strategic with it and you already understand how macros work. And I do sometimes use carb depletion. Like actually, I'm actually going to do a low carb day tomorrow because I want to drop a little bit of water weight specifically. But I'm doing it intentionally, and I'm still going to be in an actual deficit because, as opposed to just, thinking that keto is magic or something, So.
Yeah. Okay. Sounds good. Very good. So we got a couple of minutes left. So if you want to share one or two quick recipes, then
Oh yeah.
for maybe you can do like one suhoor recipe and one iftar recipe or something like that.
So for suhoor, the recipe is very simple because I don't really do anything elaborate for suhoor. I just spray the pan with coconut oil, crack 4 eggs on there, cover it while I pray tahajjud. And then from there, when I'm done praying tahajjud, the eggs are pretty much ready to go. I keep it on low heat. And I just add a little bit of salt or maybe some onion salt, nothing crazy. And then I just, serve it up over easy. And then I just take the Greek yogurts out of the fridge. I just make the protein shake. That's it. So it's very simple. There's nothing elaborate or crazy for suhoor. And again, if you do want to do something like kebabs for suhoor, then you would want to probably meal prep those at the beginning of the week because it's kind of hard to make kebabs from scratch that early in the morning with that little time. So I would probably do like a barbecue of kebabs on the weekend and then just heat them up in the air fryer in the morning. That way it's simple and easy. Or same thing with chicken nuggets. Now, for iftar though, that's where we can actually have some fun. So I'll give you guys my two favorite recipes, the biryani and the samosas. So let's do the biryani first. So first off, you're going to sprit. So we want to look at the total quantities because we want to make sure that the ratio is 40% calories from carbs, 40% calories from protein, 20% calories from fats. That's going to be the ideal scenario to ensure that, it's ideal for iftar, ideal for, fat loss or not gaining body fat, all that stuff. So that means that for every 50 grams of protein, there's going to be about 40 to 50 grams of carbs, and there's going to be roughly 15 grams of fat. So what I do is I'll usually take about 4 pounds of chicken breast, right, which is about 400 grams of protein, pretty minimal in fats. And then for that amount, if we have 400 grams of protein, that means we can also have 400 grams of carbs, which is about, let's see. So if we do 2 cups of raw rice, because every quarter cup of raw rice is about 40 grams of carbs. So if we do 2 cups of raw rice, that's 320. So we have 80 more grams of carbs. So now we can add, 2 small potatoes to it, chunk up those potatoes, and now we got some potato chicken biryani. And then how much oil can we use for that if we have 400 protein, 400 carbs? Well, from there, it's about, let's say, 75 grams of fat. That would be reasonable to hit that 40-40-20 ratio. So 75 grams of fat is about 5 tablespoons of oil. So the total amount of oil that we use in the entire recipe needs to only be 5 tablespoons. So I take the first 2 tablespoons of oil, I put it in the pan, and I fry up some chopped onion in that, right? And then, it takes a little bit longer to fry the onions to get them to that consistency that we want. I usually do 2 fried onions. That way we can use half of them for like inside of the biryani and half of them to put on top of the biryani. Now from there, I take the onions out and I put another 2 tablespoons of oil in the same basin that now has like that, onion flavor. And we'll put chunks of chicken breast in there and kind of like, fry those up. Now from there, what we want to do is take a blender and take half the onions, put it in the blender, and then you want to take 2 cups of Greek yogurt, 0% plain, right? So now this is also very low in carbs and very high in protein. So now we've actually bumped up the protein content a little bit more. And I think 2 cups of Greek yogurt, like the plain one, is about 35 grams of protein. So now the total recipe, like the batch prep that we're going to serve to multiple people or use for multiple meal preps or servings for ourselves, has 435 grams of protein, 400 grams of carbs, 75 grams of fat, roughly, right? If we don't count the trace amount inside of the chicken, and you generally want to cut the fat off the chicken, or you can keep it on and the fat content will be negligibly higher to where it's not really important. And then from there, we want to take, so there's this really popular like Shan masala biryani, right? But the problem with the Shan brand is that they use a lot of preservatives so they can last on the shelf for many years. So you could either get a homemade biryani blend from like a local Middle Eastern store that doesn't have any preservatives because it's like homemade, small batch, all that stuff. Or what you could do is you can combine all the different biryani spices. So I can't remember off the top of my head what the list of biryani spices is, but I'll send you the PDF, inshallah, and you can review it, see if it meets the standards for your foodie group, inshallah, and then you can send it to them if you like it, right? But I would try it for yourself first and make sure that the recipes do indeed taste good, which they do. But I just want to make sure that you feel excited to share it with your group.
Okay.
And then from there, it's probably something like curry powder, garam masala, cumin, like probably some of the classic, but whatever the biryani mix is, and I have a list somewhere. I think I actually add some lime and some black pepper as well. There's some Himalayan pink salt in there, and or you could use, iodized sea salt, whatever you prefer. I actually prefer iodized sea salt because I like to get a little bit of iodine, and also some Himalayan pink salt can have trace heavy metals, although apparently that was a myth, but I don't know. It scared me when I saw it, and I don't really use a whole lot of Himalayan pink salt. So you put all that in the blender and you blend it all up, and then you add that to the chicken, right? So now the chicken has this nice yogurt, like this curry flavored yogurt type mix to it, which is really good. And then you add the chunks of potato to that and you stir fry it up. Or I think you actually add the potato before you add the yogurt sauce. And then you cover it and you put it in the oven for about 30 minutes. Now, or maybe a little bit longer. Maybe it's either 30 or 60. From there, you want to parboil some rice, basmati rice specifically. So I add cinnamon, cardamom, cloves, bay leaf. I used to do Himalayan pink salt. I might still do Himalayan pink salt, but usually I use iodized salt now, iodized sea salt. And then I'll do some saffron in like a mortar and pestle next to it, and I'll put some ice cubes in the saffron. Then after that, I now have basmati rice. I'll take the chicken and potatoes and the yogurt sauce out of the oven, and then I'll layer it. So I'll do a layer of chicken, a layer of rice, a layer of chicken, a layer of rice, and then I'll put the fried onions on the top. I'll cover it, and I'll bake it for another 20, 30 minutes. And from there, it is the most amazing biryani. I mean, man, I'm getting my mouth's watering just thinking about it.
Wow, sounds good. Sounds good. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm trying it now.
Oh yeah. And then the
So you put
go ahead.
Sorry, you put potato in the biryani too.
Yes, it's
That's
chicken.
that's a Karachi style of biryani. Good. That's the good stuff.
That's where
That's
my
the
grandma.
real deal.
It is. So
Nice.
that's the biryani. Honestly, man, I want to give you guys three. I want to give you the samosa. I want to give you the halim because those are the classics. And then I gotta really perfect the pakora one before I share it. But so the samosa one. So here's what you're gonna do. You're gonna get those like egg roll pastries, right? I've looked for a gluten-free one because I do get a little bloated from gluten, but a little bit of gluten isn't gonna kill me. If you're somebody who gets severe issues from gluten, you'll have to do gluten-free. But I just do the regular ones, and it isn't the worst thing in the world. So each of those has 15 grams of carbs. So we need to have 15 grams of protein and then just negligible amount of fat. So 15 grams of protein. So that's where these samosas get a little bit thick, and bureks are easier to make because the samosas end up being like really meaty, but they're really good actually. Like, imagine a big, nice, crunchy, meaty samosa. It's delicious, right? So what you're going to do is, again, that's about a third of a pound not a third of a pound. A sixth of a pound of chicken is going to be roughly about 15 grams of protein, because 6 times 15 is 90, and a pound of chicken chicken breast is about 100 grams of protein. So it's just under a sixth, or same thing with like a pound of lean, 93% lean ground beef, or like ground sirloin is what you can do if you want to get a specific cut, right? So you take, let's say that you want to just make like 2 pounds of meat total. So you would take 2 pounds of either ground sirloin, lean ground beef, or, ground chicken breast. And you're going to add a light spray of avocado oil to the pan, and you're just going to you're going to heat it all up, right? You're going to add cumin, lime, parsley, onion. I think you actually do the onions first. I haven't made this one in a while, so I'm trying to remember, but you do the onions first, then you put the meat, then you put, the cumin, the parsley, the cilantro, I think one of the other, the salt and pepper, lots of cumin. The cumin is absolutely delicious. The lime, and it just makes this really nice inside for the, meat samosas. And then from there, you're going to take, so if you have, let's say we're making about 6 or 7 for every pound. So if we have 2 pounds, that's roughly, let's say 13 or 14 samosas that we're going to make. So you want to kind of evenly portion the meat into about 13, 14 samosas, wrap them up using the samosa wrapping technique, or make bureks, which are like these cylindrical Middle Eastern thing, right? And then what you're going to do is, once you've wrapped it up, you're going to put it in the air fryer, spray it with a very light spray, like just right, of avocado oil. You could use coconut oil, but avocado is a little better for this, or just in general, like healthier. And then you're going to air fry it for 7 minutes each side, I believe, at 400 degrees. And when you take it out, I mean, I'm going to repost this recipe because I posted last Ramadan. And it was an absolute hit. Everybody loved it. So good. And then the last recipe I'll share with you guys is the halim. Now, the halim is absolutely next level. I'm telling you guys, it is the best thing ever. Okay, so what you're going to do is you're going to take 4 pounds of lean beef, so like sirloin steak, or if you want to do chicken, you could do chicken breast, right? So 4 pounds of lean meat, okay? What you're going to do from there is, I believe it's 1 cup of like the 4 lentil mix. Like I think you can buy like 4 lentil mix where it's like yellow, red, green, and brown lentils, right? And you're going to put 1 cup of that. Now, I think it's, so you know how they usually use whole wheat kernels for the halim, like the traditional way, because I don't want to get the bloatedness from gluten, which I get issues. I get bloated from gluten, and a lot of people do too. I do actually a cup of oatmeal, gluten-free oatmeal, and that's a really nice complex carb. It has the exact same consistency. I mean, it still tastes really, really good. And I think you just add 2 tablespoons of basmati rice, which is a negligible amount of calories. So the halim actually has so much protein in it and so little fat and carbs that you can actually eat it with rice or bread, and it will still fit the macros that we need of 40% calories from protein, 40% calories from carbs, and 20% calories from fat. So it's absolutely amazing. It's like the best macro it's so good, and it's so filling and delicious. I mean, it's just next level, right? And it's got fiber, so you digest. I mean, it's just, so good. And then, so perfect for Ramadan, right? And it's warm, delicious.
Mhm.
Man, it's just, there's nothing that you won't like about it. Now, from there, you could buy a homemade small batch halim mix. Don't buy the Sean one, because again, it's got a million preservatives, so it can last on the shelf for years. But like, not to like badmouth their brand. I mean, they're a great brand and everything. And it's not something that I would eat or feed to my children or family, because it's very unhealthy and you get very bloated from it. You can tell that those preservatives do a number on your body, right? Even if it tastes good, right? So then, so you want to make a homemade mix, or you could also, I have the list in the recipe book. I think the halim recipe is in the recipe book. Of like all the different spices you can do on your own. I also have a Nahari recipe, but I don't think that one's in the book. I'm going to refine these and post them all on Instagram. So just stay tuned. You guys will see them, inshallah. But it's just hard to film recipe videos because you have to like cook and film at the same time. But then from there, you just so you put all of those in a thing, and I think you add like 2 onions to it too, right? And then you let it slow cook for 4 hours. Or if you really want to go traditional, let it slow cook overnight. Right. And then you wake up at Suhoor and it's just like, oh, it smells like the Hari in here. Right. And it's feeling that if you're somebody who does well on carbs for Suhoor, I mean, you will be full all day from this thing. It is so good. So, and I mean, man, I'm getting so excited just thinking about this. So then from there, after it's done slow cooking and all the flavors have just seeped in super deeply, you take a hand blender and you blend it all by hand. And this is why I like the beef one better, because all those little like stringy beef that you shred up, it is so good. And sometimes I'll leave a little bit of beef chunks in there. So sometimes you get a chunk of beef, sometimes you get like a string of beef.
Mhm.
Every bite is so flavorful. Now, the thing that the traditional recipe does, they add oil afterwards, but that would ruin the macros. You don't have to add oil, but you can add lemon juice afterwards, right? There's enough room that you could add a little bit of like toast, like you could take a tortilla and like air fry the tortilla so it gets crispy, and then split it into things and put it on top of the halim, put some lemon on it, add a little Middle Eastern flair to it, some cilantro, boom. Or you can just take lemon, do it desi style, or you can do it with bread, or you can put it on top of rice. I actually like putting it on basmati rice. It's really good. It's a very versatile, delicious halim. I don't know if you can hear me. Like, I have to keep swallowing because my mouth's like watering now thinking about these things. The reason I made these recipes, there's no way I could be a bodybuilder or a fitness guy or have a 6-pack if these foods didn't taste good, because, there's no way I could eat just bland chicken and broccoli. And I actually don't even eat broccoli because it makes me bloated. So that's those are 3 recipes for you, man. I hope you guys enjoy it, inshallah, as well as the rest of the book.
Thanks for joining us. And where can people find you online? Where can people follow you?
So my biggest platform is Instagram. So if you search up on Instagram, all one word, The Modern Muslim Man. The Modern Muslim Man on Instagram. That's my biggest platform. I also have the same name on TikTok, which is less of a big platform. Like I've got like 40 something K on TikTok. I've got almost 100K on Instagram, alhamdulillah. And on YouTube, that's my smallest platform. I only got like 1.6K there. But if you search up all the words "The Modern Muslim Man," the first video that comes up is, it says Ibn Taymiyyah, criticizes the modern Muslim man. He's not criticizing me. He's criticizing Muslim men in general, which is funny. And then the second one that pops up is my channel. You'll see a picture of me in a suit smiling, and that's my YouTube channel where I've got a lot of deep dives that talk deep into nutrition, exercise, motivation, Suhoor, Iftaar, everything.
We are delighted to bring you these illuminating conversations and are so grateful to Brother Mounir for sharing his knowledge and helpful tips as we prepare for Ramadan this year. The Artistic Foodies. Before we go, show some love for your favorite podcast by leaving us a review on Apple Podcasts. Be sure to find us on YouTube, Facebook, and Instagram to stay tuned for more episodes as well as bonus content. You can also have access to all of our episodes at www.theartisticfoodies.com. This podcast has been brought to you by Halal Fest Incorporated and Gathering All Muslim